We want to say good morning to those of you that are joining us right now. We'll be kicking off our meeting here shortly. Obviously, the number of participants is beginning to climb. And in a few minutes, those of you not joining us on Zoom will be joined by another group of individuals on Facebook. So we'll be touching base with those folks as well. So if you have a chance, just fill out that welcome poll box that's up in front of you right now. And sit back and grab that second cup of coffee, and we're going to learn a little bit about ethanol today. Hopefully, those of you that are joining us so far have not had to travel on the roads all that much. You've been able to fire up your computers, your iPads, whatever you do have, either at home or in the work shed. Further north you get, the slipperier the roads are. That temperature is right around 28, 29, 30 degrees here in the central part of the state, and a little bit cooler up north. So there is a small layer of snow, from what I understand, up by Houghton Lake, Gladwin, in that area. Possibly as much as 2 inches, they tell me, up around Roscommon and the Mayo Rose City area. But here in the Great Lakes Bay region, Saginaw Bay City, Midland, we're dealing with a little bit of ice this morning. So the salt trucks are out. The main expressway is just wet, but driving is pretty cautious driving, especially the further north you get, the slipperier it is. Pretty heavy traffic. I was surprised at how heavy that is this morning. And everybody was, well, 6 feet isn't very far when you're driving a car. It is when you're standing next to each other. I wish some of those cars were a little bit more space between, but now
so you want the cars to do a little better social distancing, huh?
A little bit better all the time, if you know what I mean. They do like to kind of crowd up, bunch up on each other. We continue to get a lot of new participants. So again, if you have the opportunity, fill out our welcome poll. And then sit back and relax. We'll be joined by our Facebook folks momentarily, and then we'll get our meeting underway. Jim, you've got a pretty busy schedule today, so.
Yeah, so, this is all being brought to you by the Corn Marketing Program, and we actually have one of our board meetings that will be occurring today, this morning. They're actually going to be listening to the Coffee with Corn from our boardroom. And so I think that we're going to have a very busy day, but very productive day. So.
Well, with the board listening there, Jim, you gotta make sure all your ducks are in a row, all right?
Yeah, something like that. I think I'm too old for that anymore. It just seems like it is what you get, kind of like the radio voice, right, Terry?
There you go. I tell you, been blessed so far this year. Maybe all that masking helped as far as keeping the colds and the flu away. It's been not too bad, but the allergy season is going to start to kick in here pretty quick. So I got a funny feeling we're going to have to contend with that a little bit. I see Kathy has joined us. Hi, Kathy. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Good morning.
You got some tea or coffee, or what you got there?
I'm pounding my coffee.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Hey, we're joined now by our folks on Facebook. We want to say good morning to each and every one of you. I'm Terry Henney, farm broadcaster at WSGW in Saginaw, icy Saginaw, Michigan this morning. Drive a little on the slow side. but we made it in, and hopefully all of you watching have made it to where you want to go, or you're just sitting back relaxing either at the home dining room table, wherever, or out in the work shed. Because we're going to get started here with our Coffee with Corn presentation today for March the 16th. We continue to see a number of participants move in, and we'll be adding participants as we go through our program today. We're going to be talking about ethanol, and I can't think of a better two people to talk to than Jim Zook and Kathy Bergren. Jim and Kathy, good morning to both of you. How you doing?
Good morning, Terry. We're doing well, and we're actually dry down here in the Lansing area.
Kathy, where are you talking to us from?
Good morning. I am in Washington, D.C. this morning, so a little cloudy out, might rain later, but yeah, we've got have had a little taste of spring the past few days, so hoping it continues.
You know, you bring up a good point. A lot of people really like the cherry blossoms. They like to go to Washington during that period of time. I'm just kind of curious. I would assume they're on schedule as far as when?
Yeah, no, it's looking like end of the month, first part of April is what they're saying for the bloom this year. So yeah, looking forward to that. You always know the cherry blossoms are on their way when everybo's allergies start kicking in, but it's always a great reminder of spring. And I think this year too, everybody's anxious for spring and to get it started. So it makes everybody feel a little bit more upbeat for sure.
Well, you bring up a really good point, because a year ago when the cherry blossoms were out, nobody could really walk around and enjoy them all that much. We were pretty well locked down, weren't we?
Yeah, I mean, even though it was a little bit restricted, I think just because it always draws such a huge crowd, and just not wanting to, have huge numbers of people, all together. So hopefully a little bit better this year, and folks can get out and enjoy it.
Coffee with Corn is a presentation of the Corn Marketing Program of Michigan. And we're very happy to have not only Jim and Kathy, but Angel Genio joining us this morning too. We're going to have obviously a number of questions from our participants as we go through the program. And as you happen to think of those questions, go ahead and just, if you're on Zoom, go down to the bottom of your screen, click on the Q&A, and then type that question in. Angel will be watching those questions, and we'll field them and pass them along to Jim and Kathy. Also, for our Facebook participants, if you have any questions, you do have your comments section there, so you can type that question right in on the comments. No CCA or RUP credits for today, so you don't have to be concerned about doing anything at the end of our presentation. We're just going to, as we said before, sit back, relax, and learn a little bit more about the future of ethanol. Obviously, things are ebb and flowing right now when it comes to the future of the combustion engine. It's a ways off, but there's still a lot of questions out there. But as farmers, we have to continue to provide our corn, especially, for a variety of things. And one of them, very importantly, is the ethanol industry. So without further ado, I want to hand the presentation over now to, first of all, Jim Zook. Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Terry. And that's a great intro into what we're talking about today. And we're going to hopefully give our listeners and viewers a little bit of some background to show how important the ethanol industry is to the price of corn. So I'm going to go ahead and actually get started right in with our presentation, and so that all can get to see this. First of all, for Michigan, this is kind of a bar chart that shows where our corn actually goes to. That once we harvest it, we actually supply the export markets. But one may wonder, well, wait a minute, we don't load any ships here. A lot of what we do is we backfill into those areas of the U.S. that it's a little bit easier for them to get to a port or get them to a larger rail terminal. And then we backfill into the Carolinas, Florida, and then down along the Ohio River Valley as well. But then obviously ethanol is a big driver that we have. And then again, we cannot forget our livestock industry with the feed that we do. And we always keep a little bit in surplus to carry us from year to year. So that's kind of a good breakout. And again, on average, we produce about 300 million bushels of corn a year. We're about 13th in the nation as a state. So again, you got to keep in mind that we produce most of that in the lower, the lower third of the state, third to half of the state. So when we look at the ethanol supply demand, this kind of gives you an overall view of where we started, where we really started back in 2000, 2001, 2002, we had a program that President Bush put in place that was really an enticement to the ethanol industry to build. Actually, I think it might have been 3 when it actually got going, but it paid producers on new production of ethanol that happened within the U.S. That program only lasted about 3 years, and then it was defunded, and so we didn't get it going to its full potential. But in the end, we actually were able to build the capacity based on the RFS as we currently see it today. And again, in 2018, you can see that our actual production was the highest. And then you can see that our demand has always been a little bit below that. And again, that's where we really rely on the trade. So as we know that what happened in 20, we know that COVID hit in that March timeframe. And this graph really shows that we took a plummet. We took about, we went all the way from about an annualized production of 9 billion, all the way from 17. So we actually, cut about 8 billion, or, roughly where production was about 55% of where we normally were. And again, it took a little while to come back. We did come back, but we haven't even come back to pre-COVID days at this point. This actually does show then what happens after, or what has happened afterwards. And you can see that our demand is still not to where our production is. And we've seen a lot of our ethanol facilities actually throttle back and not meet their overall demand that they have at this point. Or I should say, the supply is much better than demand. That's where we actually have got to rely more on the export market, or we've actually got to go in and look at trying to change the policy for that. Of course, we know that the policy is being changed. We have the batteries vehicles. You see the announcement by GM. And again, we need to keep in mind that one of the reasons why the auto manufacturers are going that is because of the policies that are in place, that they have to meet the requirements that have been set forth with their CAFE or their mileage requirements. And if they don't, they receive a large penalty for that. Well, they can either pay that penalty or they can buy credits from somebody else. Well, those credits are running out as well. So that is why you're seeing an influx of all of the auto manufacturers actually promoting their move or shift to batteries in order for them to meet the requirements that are based on it. So that's a part of the work that the association will need to do, is to work on those policies that will allow us to get a benefit for those cars that actually produce ethanol in regards to the greenhouse gas emissions. Again, this is just kind of another view of what some of the electric vehicles are going to look like out there. Again, that is going to be our threat and is our number one threat for the ethanol that we produce today. And so with that, we keep going in and say, well, why is that important? Well, hopefully that this graph will show that this has been our production that we've seen. When you go back to, I believe it's 1935, and I kind of remember that time frame because actually in my shed I have a 1935 KC that my grandfather bought brand new. We still have that in the family. But again, that kind of goes to show the productivity change that we've had in our U.S. corn crop. And again, we average about 1.7 to 1.9 bushel increase every single year since 1935. And I challenge any industry that has been able to see that sustained growth over that many years. You know, we're closing in on 100 years, and we actually don't look for that, or actually we look for that increase to continue. So that means that we've got to figure out, what are we going to do with that corn? And so when we look at it, again, we have about a 2 bushel increase per year, roughly 90 million acres. We can produce about an additional 180 million bushels each year, or that actually would equate to about 504 million gallons per year of additional ethanol that can be added. That is what keeps our marketing program going and challenging, to try to see how can we use up that corn, just because we know that we got to try to utilize all those acres and try to make those as profitable as possible for our corn producers. So with that, I'm actually going to switch over to Kathy, and she's going to talk about the evolving of where we're going with the liquid fuels and ethanol. Kathy?
Great, thanks, Jim. That was a good overview of kind of what the market looks like out there. And yeah, I think, like you were saying, I think we're really looking at, how do we continue to keep ethanol competitive and have a policy, policies that help keep ethanol competitive as well and grow demand. Really, when you look at kind of some of the policy context in Washington right now, and it's not a new, but it's certainly been kind of building over the past several years, really an emphasis on reducing emissions and policies that reduce emissions, the transportation sector being one of the largest sources of emissions is certainly getting a lot of focus. So, when it comes to policies that make vehicles more efficient, that, do other things to reduce emissions, those are the types of policies that we're really focused on and looking to ensure that ethanol can play a role. Because I think one of our key messages to policymakers is, if you are really concerned about reducing those emissions and you need low carbon fuels, we're your solution. And ethanol is a solution that's available right now. We don't have to wait for, these other technologies to, come online and to become more affordable. Ethanol is available right now and at a price that is more affordable to more consumers. You can go to the next slide, Jim. Thank you. Yeah, and so I think this is, kind of a little bit more about kind of what we're working on at NCGA. I think as Jim, was outlining there, we know there's going to be a bigger mix of fuels and vehicles and technologies out there. I don't think, we're going to be able to, say that it must just be, certain kinds of vehicles or certain kinds of technologies. It's going to be a bigger mix. So we really want to make sure that ethanol is ready to compete and be a big part of that. We know we have the renewable fuel standard that is certainly kind of the basis for federal policy that provides access into what would otherwise be a closed market for ethanol. And then we really want to build on the success of the renewable fuel standard with some new policies that really take advantages of ethanol's best properties. One, that it's low carbon. Two, that it's high octane, so it can be more efficient in the right vehicles. And so those two things together are really what can help keep ethanol and liquid fuels competitive going forward. We, really looking for opportunities to work with the Congress, with the Biden administration, really highlight these, environmental benefits that ethanol provides, and and really the fact that it is a solution that is affordable and available right now. We've seen a lot of updated analysis around ethanol. It's been very helpful. Really kind of continues to reinforce that ethanol's carbon footprint continues to shrink, and our product continues to look better. A lot of that, ties back to production practices on farms, the way that, efficiency improvements in ethanol plants, and really those two things together really help continue to improve ethanol, while at the same time we're seeing fossil fuels are going in the other direction. So I think we really, really want to make sure we're positioning ethanol as part of that low carbon solution, so that we can have a role as, as this transportation mix continues to change and kind of continues to evolve. Next slide, Jim. Great, and here's a little bit more of those numbers that really shows how ethanol is improving over time. I think currently we'd say that ethanol is, kind of on average, it's going to be different for different ethanol plants and different production practices, but at least 43% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than gasoline. And we've seen over time how that has gotten better. And really that's, again, reflecting those on-farm production practices. I think the fact that, the yield increases have meant that we're growing, the same and more corn with less land and fewer resources. And all of those different things really get accounted for in that. You also see some very low carbon ethanol there at the bottom of the graph. That's corn kernel fiber ethanol. You will using the fiber on the outside of the kernel to make ethanol. That's considered cellulosic ethanol, so it has an even lower carbon profile. And I think it's really important to look at this, and some of these numbers are even from California. California has a low carbon fuel standard in their state. They don't quite account for the carbon quite the same way we would, but even under their system, as we see, ethanol is getting better, and fossil fuels are getting worse in terms of carbon emissions. Next slide. And I think, in addition to the low carbon part, it's the high octane value of ethanol that's important as well. This chart kind of compares some different, different additives and substances that can be used to increase the octane value in liquid fuels so that they're going to work better in high efficiency engines. And as you can see, ethanol outperforms all of these other sources in terms of octane value, and not just on octane value either. Many of these additives, things like benzene, toluene, xylene, are very toxic components of gasoline. And so they have a lot of health concerns, pollution concerns. And so really you're not left with a lot of choices here. Ethanol really rises to the top because you don't have those pollution concerns, and that you're going to get with some of those other substances. Yeah, I think this is a lot of information on this chart, but I think it's interesting. I think it just shows that there are different combinations of fuels and vehicles that can reduce carbon emissions and sort of get to this goal of much lower emissions. And I think it really also shows that on the electric vehicle side, it really depends on where your electricity comes from. In California, there's a much greater amount of renewable energy. In some areas in the Midwest, there's not. And so you really have a different mix in your power grid in different areas. And that's really what affects those emissions levels. So I think we can certainly see that an E85 vehicle is going to be better than on emissions than an electric vehicle in many areas based on that power grid. You look at other vehicle combinations, whether it's E15, whether it's a high efficiency, high octane fuel, which mid-level ethanol blend. There's a lot of different options that can get to these lower emissions, and I think that's what's really important is really looking at policies that are technology neutral, where we're not requiring specific fuels or saying only these types of vehicles, but that you're really allowing this competition between all of these different options, so that the lowest cost and the lowest emissions are the ones that really kind of come out in that competition. That level playing field is important. Great, and I think Jim talked about this a little bit too. We see, and a lot of this is driven by, on the policy side, by fuel economy standards, where automakers for their vehicle fleets, they must kind of have an average miles per gallon and greenhouse gas emissions. Those have gradually increased. Under the Trump administration, they finalized a rule that requires a 1.5% annual increase in fuel economy over the next several years. That was a lot lower than what had been proposed in previous administrations. I think we do expect the Biden administration to take another look at that. And there's a lot of discussions about increasing that going forward. So that's, certainly another area that kind of helps, that really helps drive policy and drive decisions by auto manufacturers. Next slide. Right. So I think kind of getting back to some of the things that we're working on, kind of based on this type of information, what are the policies that we're going to be working on, in Washington. Certainly, I think we will, we continue to support the renewable fuel standard, and really like to highlight that the RFS has already done a lot to reduce emissions. And there's a lot we can do to really build on the success of the RFS. We've seen, I think kind of the first step that really needs to be done is really kind of optimize the RFS. It really hasn't been used to its full potential. As we've seen over the last few years, a lot of refinery waivers have been granted under the RFS. There have been other waivers that have been granted, and those gallons haven't been put back in. So I think our first step is, we need to really optimize the RFS and make sure we're kind of getting everything out of that we need to. When you have all of those waivers and really kind of reducing the requirements to blend, you're really reducing the incentive to move to higher blends like E15, and really kind of taking away that, that force of the RFS to push towards those higher blends. So that's certainly an area that we're going to continue to focus on. You may have heard some discussions about some new legislation that corn growers have been working on. It's called the Next Generation Fuels Act. This is really about transitioning the gasoline supply to lower carbon, high octane fuel to reduce emissions, and making sure that those vehicles that are using those more advanced engines have the right kind of fuel to work with those advanced engines. It really helps keep liquid fuels competitive. It helps keep the vehicles and engines competitive in the long run. Really ensures that there's choice and alternatives in that market. So that's some legislation we're going to continue to be working on. And I think you'll also see a lot of discussion around this idea of a low carbon fuel standard or a clean fuel standard. And again, this is kind of a market-based policy that's going to reward and credit fuels that offer carbon emissions reductions. I think certainly has been a lot of attention to California's system. I think when we look at this as corn growers, we realize we don't want to rubber stamp what California has done. There's some things that in their system that don't work and are not advantageous for all fuels. So I think really looking at how we, if that's a policy that folks on the federal level are interested in, how do we make that different and make that better from a standpoint of what California has done? So we're not just rubber stamping that. Next slide, Jim. So a little bit more here about how do we kind of optimize the RFS. Again, ending this abuse of RFS waivers, that's an important first step. We do have some litigation that NCGA and corn growers were involved in that we won last year, that basically the court agreed that EPA overstepped its authority in granting these waivers. That has been, appealed to the Supreme Court. Essentially, the Supreme Court will hear that case in April. So we will, see the outcome of that. In the meantime, the incoming Biden administration EPA has said, we agree with the 10th Circuit, but we can't do anything on these additional pending waivers until after the Supreme Court decision. So they're going to wait for that. But I think it's helpful that they've really signaled a shift in direction away from this huge granting of RFS waivers. So that's a good first step. We need to also encourage the administration The outgoing administration, because of all of the waivers and uncertainty, didn't issue kind of the annual volume requirements under the RFS last year. So we do need EPA to go ahead and do that and move that forward. That's really important, and sending a signal to the market to continue to blend those fuels. And then finally, 2022 is a big year in the RFS. The RFS doesn't end. But the volumes that are written in the law do run out, and then EPA has additional authority to set those annual volumes. So this is the year to sort of set up those rules of the road and for how that's going to work going forward. Next slide. So a little bit more about that process, right? EPA is going to have to write a rule and some regulations this year that will govern how those volumes are set in subsequent years after 2022. So this is going to be a really important process, for making sure that the RFS allows for continued growth. There's a lot of factors that EPA has to look at, and we think those are, some of those are certainly very positive. They're going to look at, what's the impact on the rural economy, on fuel costs. They have to talk to USDA about it, as they're doing it, but it's certainly, going to have a lot to say in kind of the direction of the RFS going forward. Next slide. Great, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Next Generation Fuels Act as well. Kind of what's the idea behind this legislation? I think as we really think about it, we really look at, how do vehicles and fuels work together to become more efficient? And what automakers say is the fuels that are available in the marketplace don't allow us to use these advanced technologies in our engines that we know would make vehicles more efficient. So they're looking for a higher octane fuel. As we talked about, ethanol is the most cost-effective source of this additional octane. And so really when you kind of, increase an octane standard, it allows automakers to improve their fuel efficiency. It also reduces emissions because you're using lower carbon ethanol and because of that higher efficiency. So again, I think you really, feel like this is, we're positioned to be a big part of the solution, but really need this policy change to help move that forward. I think for farmers, a lot of questions of, well, what would this mean, for corn growers? I think it really helps, in the long run, because this would be a long-term transition, continue to keep liquid fuels relevant, continue to keep biofuels as a bigger part of the fuel supply. And we're looking at, up to additional, 1.8 billion bushels of corn demand when this will be fully transitioned and phased in. So certainly important for farmers, but important for this idea of continuing to improve the fuels and vehicles to really meet these needs of lower emissions and higher efficiency. Okay. So kind of where is this legislation at? It was introduced last year. As we know, when you get to the end of a Congress after elections, everything has to start all over again. So legislation that was introduced in 2020 has to be reintroduced in 2021. So that's kind of what we're working on right now is working with our sponsor, Congresswoman Bustos from Illinois, on reintroducing this legislation and really working to get some additional members of Congress to sign on and agree to support the bill up front before it's introduced. And so they've got a couple of things that some of these members might be interested in kind of changing a little bit in the legislation. So that's a process that we're working through right now, but hopefully going to continue to move that forward. We certainly see this as bipartisan legislation, something that both Republicans and Democrats can support, and are really positioning it in that way. So we're continuing to meet with a lot of members and their staffs on this, and certainly encourage you all, when you have the opportunity, to visit with your members of Congress and their staff to highlight this for them. I think one thing that we've learned, kind of in the time when we had this bill introduced last year, we're talking to people, this is really a new issue for a lot of members of Congress and their staff. And what that tells us is that really requires us, all of us across, NCGA and state corn grower associations, to really do a lot of, we need to do a lot of outreach with our members of Congress to help them understand this. So I think it does require more than one meeting, more than one conversation on a new issue like this. But I think the opportunity is there. I think a lot of members of Congress are, really kind of like the idea of going on offense on an issue. We certainly play a lot of defense on the RFS, and that's important, and we need to do that. But I think people kind of like this idea of, kind of here's an opportunity to go on offense. I think one other challenge we're finding is, on the committee in Congress that has jurisdiction over this issue, over fuels and energy, there's not a lot of interest in this policy, to be honest, right now. There's not a lot of Midwest members on that committee. There's a lot of coastal members, and I think I think we really recognize that we have a lot of work to do. So I think for those members and really trying to help them understand this, really emphasizing the emissions reductions that we're providing. So, a mix of challenges, but also some opportunities too, and really kind of help inform how we talk to members of Congress and their staff about this legislation. And just really briefly, I think we are seeing from some members of Congress a lot of interest in this concept of an overall low carbon fuel standard across transportation. So it's something that we've spent some time at NCGA through our ethanol team and working with state associations like Michigan Corn to really make sure we're kind of diving in a little bit more to this policy and making sure that if this is a direction that Congress is interested in, how do we make sure that it works for corn growers? And so we've kind of joined a group of different stakeholders really looking at this and have spent a lot of time internally looking at this. I think a low carbon fuel standard could work really well with an octane standard like the Next Generation Fuels Act. Ethanol is a low carbon fuel. It really provides a greater incentive to use more low carbon fuels, and so that would mean higher ethanol blends. But I think also what we found is we really, this idea that it has to be technology neutral, and really treat all different fuels and vehicles the same and use the same measuring stick to measure emissions reductions from all of those sources is really an important part of this, to make sure that something like this would work for ethanol, would work for corn growers. But I think what we do know is, if we have competition and we have a level playing field, those lowest cost solutions are the ones that are going to get an advantage. And we certainly offer a low cost solution in ethanol. So again, I think we're going to continue to, look at these types of policies, knowing there's a lot of interest in Congress, working on the Next Generation Fuels Act to really make liquid fuels competitive in the long term. It, will be an important part of our strategy. And then again, really looking at how we, kind of optimize the RFS and make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck there and not kind of selling ourselves short. I think those are three areas that corn growers are going to be working on the federal policy level, again, to make sure that we've got a pathway for ethanol to continue to compete, and liquid fuels to be updated and modernized and relevant in the low carbon context.
So we're gonna shift, and we're gonna come back and answer the questions that are there. We're gonna wrap up on some exports. Just to let you know, even though it may sound a little bit doom and gloom, so to speak, with the domestic fuel, we want to highlight where the positives are, and then we're going to come back to your questions and answers and have all that, plus some other comments that we got, at least some things for you to think about, and kind of maybe a little bit of a charge forward for each of you that are on this call. So as we know, exports are very critical to our industry. U.S. Grains Council is a sister organization that we help fund. They actually go into many communities, or I should say many countries, and they go in where the markets don't. So they have to go in and educate policymakers. They have to go in and educate, the people who use products, whether it be distillers grain or whether it be ethanol. How do you blend it? How do you store it? So that is the importance of the U.S. Grains Council on your bottom line. So this particular graph here kind of shows where we, grains in all forms that we actually export out. And as you can see in that, we really got a ramp of the end of 13, all the way up into 18, 19, and obviously we tapered off a little bit because of the world economy slowing down. But I will tell you that the ethanol explosion in the export markets, I know I probably shouldn't use that word explosion with ethanol, but anyway, with the exports, that actually came on with some policies during the Obama administration. And actually, probably more so had to do more with our Secretary of Ag, Vilsack. He was a big pusher in getting funding for the council to promote ethanol exports. And so that's why when he was announced to be the Secretary of Ag moving forward, we feel comfortable because right here is a proof of what he did for your industry to really promote and to get ethanol exports going forward. So when we look at all of this and we actually go back to the 17, you can see that in the blue line, the blue bar is actually where we exported the most. And as you can see, 2018, February of 18 was the most that we exported. We were actually on target to continue to export going into the COVID of last year, but then obviously COVID hit and you could see how it all fell off worldwide, our ability to export into those foreign countries. So during that time in 18 and 19, I don't have this graph for our current at this point. I am going to try and pull up a website on that, but I'm going to finish the presentation first. You can see that Brazil was actually one of our top exported countries for ethanol, followed by Canada. I know many of us here in Michigan, we kind of forget about Canada because sometimes we view Canada like going to Indiana or Ohio. So again, they are a big user of our ethanol, and they're usually there every single year for us. Followed by India. As many of you may know or may not, a year ago, I actually did travel to India, and I think I do have some pictures of that trip at the Indian Auto Show to actually promote ethanol in the fuel systems. They currently use a lot of the ethanol for industrial uses, and now they're actually moving to actually put that into their refined gasoline to help clean up their environment they have. Again, we follow that by the EU and then obviously South Korea there. So again, this kind of gives you another take as to, what is each one of those countries actually consuming, or what are we actually exporting? And again, you look at the in 18, the rest of the world actually, and all those other countries was equal to what we actually exported in Brazil. So it's very important that we keep all of those channels to those countries open because you just never know that mix of when one may come up and when one may go down. So, one of the things that how we actually go in and create those markets is a quote by our Senior Director of Global Strategies for U.S. Grains Council. It's all about educating, building relationships for the council. And what we've learned is that, again, these relationships are critical. And those are why we do trade missions too. And we have them come to the U.S. because many of the foreign buyers want to see who they're buying from. But again, the education is a very key component about how that works in their system, what they have to do, what are the barriers that they have to break down. But as we know, in the 2020, after COVID, we actually now are doing, we have limited the in-person, obviously, but we found that the virtual world has been extremely beneficial for us. we've realized that some of the education pieces that we do as the council, we can do virtually, much like what you're doing today, by listening to all of this and being educated about ethanol. And you're doing that through the virtual world that's out there. So I think that is actually going to change how we do business moving forward. I will tell you, it's much more cost effective to do it this way. But again, it doesn't replace that relationship building that does need to occur if you want to actually have sustained growth and have those companies or those countries year after year. So again, this is a picture of when we were actually in India. This particular auto show, there was over 600,000 attendees to this auto show. And these three actually work for our U.S. Grains Council. They're the ones who actually got us into this venue. And again, with one of the top ministers over in India around the fuels. Here we're highlighting an E85 pump, an E30 pump, E15, and then obviously some of the regular gas. Again, this is very critical, and that actual trade show, we had a huge amount of success with it there. This actually is the chairman or president, as we may call it here, of their #1 energy company. In our meetings with them, they got it. They got it to the fact that what they realized is if we bring in crude oil, which they have to import crude oil, they will refine that crude oil, and then they'll actually ship that out to other neighboring countries. His comment was, well, geez, you know, we can actually import ethanol, we can refine our crude oil, we can blend the gasoline, and we got more blend the gasoline with ethanol. We've got more product to sell. And it's like, ding, 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 you get it, you understand it. They don't have the ability to, they're like the US, where they like to be self-sufficient, but they just don't have the capacity actually to provide for that ethanol industry. And that's where they can see their economic advantage is to actually to come in and buy from the US. I will tell you at that trade show, obviously Canada or Brazil was there as well. And so we do have competition on the world market. Again, that's about building those relationships. We were able to provide them some education and data that they needed in order to get this passed through their Congress as well. So we felt like that particular mission was very beneficial. And Greg is my counterpart in Kansas. We were the ones that went out there. We were one of the first people representing the ethanol industry from the US that actually was in India. And we believe we opened the door for that whole industry there. So with that, I'm actually going to try to actually share another screen with you, if I can. And this particular screen, I'm going to blow this up, actually is where we're currently at with our marketing year. And again, as I talked about Canada, Canada is #1, and as you can see, India has really increased what we've shipped there. Again, we believe that it is a result of that relationship that was built with India. South Korea, if you remember, was #5 in the 18-19 timeframe. They're now #3. Colombia is another growth market. And as you can see here, you look like when you look at China, they were, they weren't buying that much. And again, this year they bought 43 million. However, it's China, we got to wait and make sure that that gets delivered. So with that, that is actually our actual formal presentation. There's a couple, I guess we'll go to questions right now, and then there's some other comments that I would like to actually close with, or some ideas for everybody to take home. So Angel?
Yeah, Angel, what have you been able to pick up so far on the questions?
Yeah, so we have a couple of kind of background questions first, and one person asked if E85 means 85% ethanol. Jim, maybe you could talk about the labeling a little bit, or what that means.
So that's a very interesting a question because of the parameters that are placed upon us. It can be anywhere from 51 to 75%. I think it's 75%, and it all has to do with the finished gasoline that's out there. And it depends on things like reed vapor pressure. It depends on some other compounds within the gasoline as to how much they can put in. And again, time of year does make a difference too on how much ethanol can be placed in that gasoline as well. So even though it does say 85, it does mean that it's a higher percentage of ethanol. Doesn't always mean that it is 85% ethanol, because again, it does vary based on what the feedstock of what ethanol is being blended into.
Can never just be a simple yes or no, can it?
No, not an ethanol. It is not that simple. It's extremely complex.
So we also had a question, and maybe Kathy can talk about this one a little bit, but when we're talking about a low carbon, high octane fuel, what does that mean in terms of how much ethanol we're talking about?
I think a lot of the research that has been done has shown that, to really be, to really deliver that additional efficiency and emissions reductions, something in the range of a 25% to a 30% blend really kind of maximizes a lot of those efficiency benefits for the automakers, and really gives you more emissions reductions because you're blending more ethanol. So I think that's kind of the target there. I think in the legislation we've been working on, it doesn't require a specific blend. It does require EPA to approve blends up to 30%, but would really kind of give some flexibility to the marketplace to determine what's going to be the most efficient way to reach that octane level, with additional ethanol. So it could be up to 30%. But it's not a requirement for a specific blend level, which I think is a kind of a good selling point. We're not being that, we're not, it's less of a mandate, if you will. I know some people that want to stay away from something that could be characterized as a mandate, and it does kind of provide that flexibility, to kind of find that sweet spot in the marketplace that delivers those benefits that, whether automakers or, on the emissions side, that people are looking for.
We also had a couple of kind of infrastructure related questions. So I don't know if you want to tag team this one, but we had a question about the status of getting more biofuels, gas stations, and pumps in Michigan and in the US broadly.
So, and I know there's another question about E85 capable vehicles, and I think what we'll do is we'll bring those questions together because they are interrelated. Yes, there are still some automakers that actually make E85. Unfortunately, it is not GM. It is Ford still makes some, and I believe Chrysler does as well. Actually, we just bought a new Ford pickup truck because GM did not have a Ford pickup, or GM did not have a pickup truck. So with that, because we're having a reduced supply of E85 vehicles, the ability for, I guess, stations to make money on putting in an E85 pump become limited. It'd be kind of like having somebody who was always shoeing horses when the horse and buggy were going out. We don't think it's going out. We do believe that it could be a transition fuel for us to what Kathy just talked about with the E30 type of fuels that could be coming forward. But so that's going to be the challenge to have in the flex fuel pumps or the E85 pumps that are out there. What we encourage the station owners to do is to actually put in what we truly call a flex fuel pump, where they could actually vary, where they actually put a tank of ethanol in, and then they put a tank of gas, and then at the pump you choose what octane level you want, which then blends the amount of ethanol in order to get that octane. To me, if I was a station owner, I could keep it very simple by actually having by having my station set up that way. It is very difficult, though, for even station owners to understand possibly where we may be heading. I mean, if they truly believe that the electric vehicles are going to be the total wave of the future, they probably will stop putting in fuel pumps. We don't believe it's going to be that way, but that is something that we need to be aware of from a station owner standpoint. Right now, I will tell you that a station who is blending or selling E85 is actually making a very good profit because of where the price of ethanol is compared to the price of gasoline. They can create a differential that's very advantageous to the consumer, and they still can actually profit more on a per gallon basis if they offer E85 in those manners. So again, this is a little bit change of our dynamics that are out there right now.
And Kathy, could you maybe talk about what that looks like nationally, like where we are in terms of infrastructure?
Sure. I think we have had a couple of rounds of an infrastructure grant program from USDA, most recently last year, to retailers to help them and, give them, some cost share for installing infrastructure for blends of 15% and higher. Maybe during COVID wasn't the best time to roll out a grant program for some fuel retailers, kind of given those fuel charts that Jim showed, but that was just, it was already in the works, before that. So, USDA did roll it out and they did get a good response, even in that environment. So, programs like that help add some additional infrastructure, particularly for retailers that are interested in offering a 15% blend. So that certainly is, it provides some additional ethanol blending and is an important step for a lot of retailers. We were successful a couple of years ago to getting some regulatory barriers removed to that 15% ethanol blend. So that has been helpful in getting more retailers to offer that. Still, not as quick of adoption as we're looking for. I think there's some additional, regulatory barriers on labeling and tanks at retail stations that we're continuing to work on. But so I think there are some opportunities for retailers, like Jim said, to kind of take advantage of that and really, when they look at kind of the way, because ethanol is lower cost and kind of the advantage that they can offer their consumers on price. There are more retailers looking at E15 and other blends as well. And certainly from a federal policy level, I think we want to make sure, kind of goes back to that level playing field and making sure that if there's going to be some additional federal infrastructure programs for, vehicles and fuels, that all types of fuels, including higher ethanol blends, be eligible for those.
So one other thing that I'd like to add on that is through the corn growers, we actually work with one of the major retailers, so that one of their pumps that they actually manufacture, that coming off of their assembly line is acceptable to receive up to 25% ethanol. That it actually has been approved to do that. So that this is another way that we can break down, because we always get thrown these barriers as to why we can't use a higher blends of ethanol. And quite frankly, we're finding out they're all BS because, again, it's just trying to throw roadblocks in the distribution of higher blends of ethanol. But I think I'm going to go back. I think we do have a question about the oil industry. I'm going to go back in and answer that through this. Right now, because of the announcement of GM with the batteries and people moving towards electrification, we're starting to see the oil companies maybe start to be a little bit more willing to talk with us across the aisle, so to speak. But again, it's still it's a careful dance that we have to walk with them. Just because we've seen what they've done to our industry in the past. But we are willing to talk with them. We actually have had talks with some refiners. The refiners, again, there's different levels in the oil industry. They're not all, you know, all the way from the oil field all the way up, owned by the same people. So everybody does have kind of some different perspectives as to what to happen. But some of our smaller refineries, especially in the Midwest, are definitely want to talk to us about how we can move to higher level blends of ethanol and still keep the liquid fuels present in our fuel system.
Yeah, and I just add a little on that. I think what we're, I think we're seeing, ethanol, offers a low carbon fuel, and on the petroleum side, it's a much higher carbon product. And so in the context of carbon reduction, we certainly have a lot to offer from the ethanol side. And I think that's what we've really tried to focus on, from NCGA is really focus on the positives and the benefits of the product that we offer, and the solutions that we help provide, but particularly that, ethanol is a low carbon fuel. And if that's what policymakers are looking to reduce emissions in transportation, we can help you out.
We had a couple more kind of ethanol basic sort of questions that came in. So one, they're asking about their specific car. I have a 2011 Chrysler Town and Country. Can I buy E85? But maybe we could just broader talk about which fuels can go in which cars and how you know.
So the very first thing is you look at the gas cap. Typically back during that year, your gas cap was yellow. And so if you do have a yellow gas cap, you definitely can use ethanol. You can use ethanol in your fuel system. There's also, if you look at your serial number, the number on your car, it'll actually tell you too, but you'd have to take the dealer to let you know that. So to answer your question, whether your car can or can't, I don't know. You do have to do some investigation on your own.
I know I have a 2013 Ford Focus, and it has text kind of around my gas cap that says can use E15 and higher.
Yeah, any vehicle 2001 or newer is approved to use E15. EPA approved E15 for use in any vehicle 2001 or newer. So for E15, that right now that's about 95 to 97% of vehicles on the road, because vehicles over time are anything pre-2001 is slowly becoming less and less prevalent on the road. So certainly for a 15% ethanol blend, if you have a 2001 or newer, you're good to go. Like Jim said, on the E85 side, you're going to look to see whether that is labeled as a flex fuel vehicle or some of those other indications on the E85 side. Certainly looking, I think at one time there were definitely a lot more flex fuel vehicles being manufactured. Really trying to get automaker interest back into manufacturing those. You've seen a lot of demand, particularly California has been a huge growing E85 market, and but people are having a hard time getting the vehicles. So I think on that side of it, that's probably what you need to look at. But on E15, 2001 or newer, you're good to go.
I know we're getting up close to the end time here, Jim. You had some more comments that you wanted to share. So maybe we could pop up that slide that had the contact info on it. So for those whose questions we didn't get to, if they wanted to get in touch with Jim or Kathy, they could do that.
So, and just, I guess, maybe to wrap up as well with this, I'm going to address one of the myths that's out there, and some of the last little questions. I'll do that very quickly. When you look at separation, what I would challenge you to do is actually get a jar, a mason jar. You put regular gas in there, and then you add water to it. A few dropperfuls of water. Close that lid up, shake that ethanol blended fuel, shake that up, and watch to see if separation occurs. I'd also then go get some rec fuel that's out there. I'd add water to that. I'd do the same thing and shake that up, you will see actually what we call the phase separation occur in the rec fuel that doesn't have any ethanol versus those fuels that have ethanol. That's the misnomer that's out there. Actually, ethanol has an attraction for water, so it actually attracts and absorbs that water and keeps that in suspension so that you go through, you get that mix through. That also is the theory that if you have a metal gas can, and that's why we got away from metal gas cans, is because of the phase separation that occurred with regular gasoline without ethanol, because the water would actually settle to the bottom. That water and the metal created rust. And so now if you actually see that and had ethanol blended fuel in a metal gas can, you won't see the rust that occurs. So that's a part of the phase separation. With regards to the E85 reduction versus normal gasoline, I know it's significant. I can't tell you what that carbon reduction amount is, but it is extremely significant. The other piece that I think that we need to also be aware of is that with ethanol, it's a non-carcinogenic. And Kathy, you talked about the BTX, the benzene, toluene, xylene, the zenes that make up gasoline. Those are either known or suspected carcinogens. That is one of the reasons why NASCAR went to 15% ethanol, because those workers were working in that fuel with their skin and all that, and they were being exposed to those carcinogens. I know that Childress would love to go to an E30 blend because, again, it's just a reduction of those cancer-causing compounds that are in that gasoline. You know, one of the things that we want to, we talked about the gas infrastructure. The other thing is we have been involved with a group called Ag Auto Ethanol Alliance, and that's where we've actually tried to break down all of these barriers to higher blends of ethanol, with the autos being in there, some of the oil industry being there, obviously the ethanol industry in there, and then many of the corn grower states that were in that. And we have identified and determined, and we've actually broke down a number of those barriers, hence why we had the program with one of the fuel infrastructure people that were out there as well. So with that, you know, one of the things, there was a question about the government. I do need to clarify that GM still does make a flex fuel, but the only way you can purchase that is through their fleet purchasing. So some of the governmental agencies still do buy those that way, but not all of them. Again, it's an education piece with their coworkers. You know, there's been things even within our state vehicles, but again, it's an education piece about ethanol isn't bad like it was portrayed when it first came out. Again, that was more around supply demand. The last thing that I want to remind, or two last things I want to remind everybody about is when Kathy had the slide up there that actually showed the carbon reduction in E85 versus electric vehicles. A lot of that has to deal with the generation power for electricity. And in the Midwest, we typically have had more coal-fired plants. Those are getting replaced with natural gas. What happens, one of the things we need to think about is, what is one of the components that goes in to make our nitrogen fertilizer? Natural gas. So that is going to put some constraints for the farming as we go down the road if we have more and more of these electric generation facilities that are natural gas fired. So those are some things, those are comments that we want you to put in your memory, so that when you do go to talk, and we encourage all of you to communicate with your congressperson and senators about the importance of the next Generation Fuels Act, because of what is being proposed with more electrification of the fleet. That is actually going to raise your cost and possibly could see some issues with shortages in nitrogen fertilizers. And, we're already starting to see that in the supply at this point. So again, those are just kind of my last comments. And I think with that, Terry, I will actually turn it back to you.
All right. And Jim, you brought up a really important point, and Kathy, you also. These individual points, we really do need to put on the back burner, remember them. Because as you said before, we're dealing right now with a group of individuals that are relatively new. And my guess is within the next 2 to 4 years, we're going to see more turnover when it comes to some of these folks that we're going to have to talk to, that we're going to have to address. And we need to know all of these things as we move forward.
That's correct, Terry. And so again, our one of our roles is, I guess you can see over my shoulder there about what the corn marketing program does is education. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is not only educate our policymakers, but to educate our growers and those involved in our industry. We saw what the demand destruction has done with the COVID a year ago. We as producers can't afford to let that go. And I know that one of the questions was about what's the next thing for corn and all that. That's something we work on all the time. And we don't have that home run like we've had with ethanol. So that's why we got to continue to fight for that and try to increase the demand and break down those policies to actually allow that to happen.
Kathy, in closing with you, I'd just like to ask about the upcoming farm bill. Where are we heading right now?
I think we are, got a little bit of time, but as you know, every 5 years, that farm bill is coming around. So certainly a lot of early discussions going on among corn growers and NCGA and states about how things are working and what things we might need to look at going forward. So I think we're beginning to start that process and engaging with folks. You all are, Michigan, home to Senator Stabenow, who chairs the Senate Ag Committee. So certainly be looking forward to working closely with folks in Michigan on that. But it's always a process that's getting started. But I think always something that we've really benefited from working on a bipartisan basis with the ag committees and hope to continue to do that.
And I'm understanding from both of you that it is a really good idea to have Tom Filsack as the Director of Agriculture.
Yes, I would say that because he gets it, he understands it. So.
Yeah, no, I think we had a good relationship with him. His first time around in that position, and he was really, kind of always kept the door open on communications, and he does understand agriculture very well, understands biofuels very well. So, on the trade side as well. So I think we feel like he's a good person that we can work with.
Jim, Kathy, been a delight to listen to both of you. Thank you very much for your information. We really appreciate it. Kathy, you take care. Have a happy Easter. And as I mentioned before, enjoy those cherry blossoms. All right.
Great. Thank you.
And Jim, good luck to you on your meeting. Have a good one. And we'll be probably talking to you again next week. All righty.
Yeah, it'll be next week for our final one, and we'll do a final wrap on this 12-week series that we have completed here. It's been fantastic. Hopefully our growers are finding it extremely valuable. Again, another way that we can actually deliver education to our growers.
Very good. Jim Zook, Kathy Bergman, thank you very much. You folks have a great day, okay?
Great.
Thanks, Terry.
You.
And up on the screen right now, you probably have seen our closing poll. Angel, anything that we need to take care of here as we wrap up this afternoon?
No, we're all set. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Everyone, thank you very much for being a part of our day. We're glad that we could be a part of yours. You take care. Have a great one. And again, join us next Tuesday at 8 a.m. for Coffee with Corn.